Welcome to episode 18 of Beyond the Walls, the series where I focus on the road to launch for Embark Studios' upcoming game Arc Raiders, as well as Easter eggs in their already released game The Finals. This video isn't sponsored by Embark Studios, but I am a member of Embark Studios' content creator program for The Finals. In my previous episodes about Arc Raiders, I first gave you a detailed breakdown of the Arc Raiders gameplay reveal that Embark Studios kindly shared with me and a few other content creators, as well as my impressions of the late October tech test that the devs ran for the game they describe as a multiplayer extraction adventure. I then showed you where I think Arc Raiders will sit in the extraction shooter market amongst other games in the genre, and also talked about the game's gunplay and health. In this episode, I'm going to talk about what I consider to be one of the most important aspects of an extraction shooter, and that's questing and progression, and how gear accumulation is managed. The reason I consider these things to be so important is that while a single round in an extraction shooter might provide you with some challenging and exciting gunplay that lasts up to a few minutes in total, I think it's seeing your character, their loadout, cosmetics, and the range of quests they're faced with change and progress over time that plays one of the key roles in providing an extraction shooter game with longevity. Of course, having Embark Studios add new content in the form of additional maps, weapons, AI enemies, and other things like that is without doubt going to play a role in how long players stick with the game, but within any given week, if you're hopping into the game for a few rounds, it's your character's progression that will likely be the thing that provides you with a sense that you're part of some sort of journey or story that develops within the game. In fact, you could even think of these things being in a time frame like this. Individual encounters provide parts of the story within a round. New content from the developer will provide changes to the game's story every few months with new maps, weapons, and other content, assuming we have something like seasons within the game that are probably quarterly. But quests and character progression have the potential to play a changing role in the story of your character's journey over all time frames, from round to round, week to week, season to season, and beyond. The Arc Raiders playtest that was held back in late October 2024 only lasted a few days, so from a progression and quests point of view, it's very hard for us to judge what those things will actually be like in Arc Raiders when it releases, because during that playtest we only got a small and almost certainly highly distorted slice of what progression in the game will actually be like. But from what we did see, there are some things we can discuss and areas that will need consideration from the Embark Studios team. The in-game quests were located under their own UI tab in the tech test build of the game, and they revolve around the game's 4 traders who have 2 main roles, selling you some basic items and providing you with quests. Together, the traders also had their own UI tab separate from the quests, which is where you can go to buy items from them. The traders are Shani, who sells basic crafting materials and raider hatch keys, Tian Wen, who offers weapons, ammo, and weapon mods, Apollo, who sells various grenades and mines, as well as gadgets like zip lines, deployable barricades, and binoculars, and Lance, who's an android and offers medical supplies, armor, and armor repairs. As a side note, Lance's name is potentially a nod to Lance Henriksen, who played the android character Bishop in the movies Aliens and Aliens 3. As well as the traders, quests could also come from Celeste, who's in charge of the Raiders' home base, which is Speranza in the western sector of Toledo. Incidentally, the images for this place are based on a real-world location, the Galleria Umberto I in Naples, Italy. Back when the game was first put forward as a co-op PvE shooter, the maps were based around locations on the island of Tenerife, but with a switch to a PvPvE extraction shooter, the location clearly got a revision as well, and we saw a lot of Italian-styled buildings in the game during the most recent tech test, especially on the Buried City map. Anyhow, the quests offered by the traders and Celeste during the playtest varied from simply having to bring back specific loot items to visiting a particular location, or doing the same and interacting with something at that location, to shooting down certain types of arc machines, amongst other things. At the end of the round, you could see which quests were completed on the main hub page of the UI, so you'd know to go to the Quests tab and claim the rewards for completing those from the 4 traders or Celeste, which included items you can use in-game, Raider coins to spend on trader purchases and upgrades, and sometimes XP. Well, I feel that the quests we completed during the test were quite engaging and grounded, like visiting a residential building to find traces of a raider who was living there and owned cooked pigeons, with part of the quest including us inspecting the pigeon cages, there are some elements to the questing that need further development. Let me explain. Specifically, depending on how quests are handed out and how they have to be completed, they can act as an accelerator or brake on the amount of combat that players are likely to see in the game, and therefore can push the experience in the game anywhere from being a sneaking around simulator to being a combat sweatfest. For instance, during the tech test, quests like visiting a location would be fully completed during the round without the need to extract, which meant that once a quest was completed, teams were then essentially free to go looking for a fight, knowing that while there was the usual tension of losing gear, which is a core element of an extraction shooter, there was no risk of failing the quest. Couple this with it being relatively easy to craft new weapons, and it seemed to me like there were some instances where multiple teams would rush to an area where combat was happening because extracting wasn't a priority for them and engaging in PvP combat was pretty risk-free. Of course, the flip side to this would be if all quests required you to extract and weapons were scarce, then there'd be loads of players sneaking around trying to avoid one another simply to try and safely extract, and then things get pretty boring pretty quickly. Don't get me wrong, I don't think this is a problem for Embark Studios to overcome, more that I think if questing in the game is structured really well, then it could act as an excellent way to balance the amount of PvP and PvE combat, so it feels about right. With the tech test only a few days in length, we didn't get any sense of whether the game might include complex and extended quests that might be completed over multiple rounds or even longer. I'd like the game to include some quests like that which require multiple steps through several rounds. For instance, maybe you go into one map to collect an item, then use it to craft another item which you have to take into a different map, where the crafted item interacts with something and then you extract with the result of that interaction. This could even be pushed further, where maybe there are optional quests that need to be completed over the course of weeks or perhaps even longer. This would provide us with a wide variety of quests that are completed on multiple timeframes. During the test, quests could also be completed during trader runs, which doesn't really make sense to me because the risk associated with those runs is so low. I didn't mind that you could always choose to go on a trader run, but I think they should be done with a strict focus on looting and restocking supplies, rather than any sort of character or quest progression. That way most players will be keen to jump back into a normal round as soon as they can to continue their character's progression. And let's talk about that now. Aside from working our way through the short battle pass during the playtest, we could also improve aspects of our character's abilities, specifically conditioning, mobility, and survival. Every few rounds or from every level of the battle pass, we'd gain a skill point, each of which would allow us to progress to a new level of our character's abilities. These would include things like our stamina bar reducing at a slower rate, or recovering more quickly, being able to loot or move more quietly, climb ladders faster, or our melee ability using less stamina, and so on. The skill tree for the tech test was very basic and clearly pretty temporary, as often the conditioning, mobility, and survival branches of the tree would include similar traits. Progression through the tree also felt very much like we were just box checking, and there weren't any different paths we could choose in order to differentiate our character from those of other players. This is an aspect I would really like to see Embark Studios lean into developing with a lot of complexity, giving us a skill tree that actually requires us to make some directional choices on who our character is going to become. For instance, maybe choosing between having a character whose strengths are moving swiftly and stealthily versus one who can carry extra weight and breach containers faster. A skill tree can always be set up in a way that allows you to backtrack and undo a path. In fact, this was done in Battlefield 5, which some of Embark's devs worked on, but a decision to backtrack on a progression branch should probably come at a reasonable cost to the character, so players don't just jump back and forth between skills, encouraging players to direct their characters down skill paths that they're happy with in the long term. That doesn't mean that branches in the skill tree can't crisscross, but more that choosing paths on the skill tree should have genuine consequence about the way we play the game and allow us to forge a unique character. Lastly, let's talk about gear progression and wipes. With the basis of any extraction shooter being that players are aiming, as part of their progression, to accumulate a large stash of high-tier gear, most extraction shooters go through a cycle of all players being pretty evenly kitted when the game first releases, then a significant portion of regular players are mounting sizable stashes of great gear over time. Those players then become less concerned about a lack of gear from round to round and start looking to engage in as much combat as they can to try and keep some sort of novel novelty and excitement in the game for them. Of course, the downside of this is that anyone who joins the game at that point has to potentially face more seasoned players who are much better kitted than they are and much keener to engage, which for new players can potentially be pretty discouraging and directly affect their desire to continue playing the game or think of it favorably. There should always be scope for new players to join the game and rave about it, because that leads to additional revenue for the developers, which should lead to more content for everybody and overall a healthy player base. Most extraction shooters resolve this issue by introducing a wipe of gear, either every season or a few times randomly throughout the year. The upside of this is that the wipe puts everyone back on an even footing by having minimal gear in their stash. However, I don't think I'm alone in thinking that the reality is that wipes are quite a crude solution to the problem of gear accumulation, because they result in cycles where leading up to the wipe a lot of players are well equipped, and it's still not great for new players to join because of the gear they're up against, but also because they'll soon face a wipe before they can progress much. Other content creators have also talked about this issue, and one I've mentioned in a previous video is the Gecko Frontier, who has also made videos about Arc Raiders and who made this video about this exact topic, highlighting many of these issues. I've linked that video in the description below, and I found it useful to refer to while making this video. So if wipes weren't to be used, what would be an alternative? Well, what if players are incentivized enough that they effectively want to wipe themselves? By handing over that decision to the player, if it's done correctly, it could mean that self-wipes occur across the player base right throughout a season, which would smooth out the quantity and quality of gear held by players in the game. As an example, some players might still be carrying great gear from last season, while other players self-wiped a month ago and are now in an accumulation phase. Now, the obvious question is, why would anyone want to self-wipe? And I don't have a specific solution to that answer, but I don't think it's a stretch to imagine a situation where players can trade in all of their gear for a single item or advantage that they want badly enough to do it. For some players, that might be ultra rare cosmetics that can only be obtained this way. For others, it might be a single weapon or gadget that they're willing to sacrifice an entire stash of gear for, while for others, it might be to exchange gear for some sort of high value progression for their character. If it was for a single weapon or gadget, it means that potentially they'd gain an advantage while using that, but suddenly their risk has been switched because it's the only thing they now have. And it's that aspect that brings them down to a more equal footing alongside new players with little in their stash. In the end, it's up to Embark Studios to figure out the best way to return players to low levels of gear without entering some sort of cycle that's unattractive to new players in the part of the cycle where players are typically well kitted, but I'd like to see them consider alternatives to the wipe to do that. Let me know in the comments below how you think that might be achieved. In future episodes, we'll dive into additional aspects of Arc Raiders, so do the usual YouTube business if you want to see more videos like this one from me. Thanks for watching this video to the end, and thank you to the members of my channel for their ongoing support. It is greatly appreciated. Give a like or comment as you see fit, and enjoy the rest of your day. Kia kaha, stay strong.
Everybody knows the world ain't right. Down on your knees, get up and fight.